As I mentioned in my prior video, I spent a huge amount of time running around the whole world, been to over 50 plus countries. I regularly deal with heads of state all across the political spectrum, whether they be hyper-capitalist or hyper-socialist, some cases dictators for life. So when you live in that type of environment, you have your personal political opinions, but then you have your political realities that you have to traverse between. But one thing that I've tried to keep, despite the fact that we have such political diversity, are basic principles about how I think people ought to be treated. And those principles are reflected in the work environment I have in my own company, the way I make decisions about staffing, and the efforts we put into our protocols and products. And we try to empower people, enable people, and we do care a lot about the people who have the least amongst us. We have a very simple test for the protocols that we design. They have to be fair, and fair means that it doesn't matter where you came from, what geography you're born into. It doesn't matter whether you won the genetic lottery or not. You have equal access and equal right to the system as Bill Gates does and Jeff Bezos does. You can't predict these things. Some people are born with terrible disabilities. Some people are born in places with no internet and terrible infrastructure and in absolute abject poverty. And we shouldn't create a society and a world where if you get lucky, that's the only way you can live well. We should create a world where, because of the amazing technology we have and all the social progress we've made, that no matter where you're born or what happens to be your life story, you have something that can allow you to live well and comfortably and with dignity. The point of these protocols is that they can deliver this to the world, and we do so without the use of force. One of the reasons why I despise socialism, communism, these systems, and they're all just flavors of it, is that these systems tend to view the world in very draconian terms. You create a super powerful central entity that gets to decide what's fair, and then it takes from one group and gives it to the other group, all screaming equity. In some cases, this works, but in many cases, that hyper-centralized group gets really, really corrupted, and then they start reallocating things not based upon need or wisdom or judgment, but based upon political access. And we saw this with the Soviet Union, and that's the most extreme example. 100 million people died. That's just a fact of the 20th century. It was just a disgusting, terrible thing. And nobody seems to really want to revisit that, or they say, oh, well, that was just a different flavor, and our flavor is great and merciful. And then they point to certain countries and say, well, these are great examples of what we want. And then they find out that those countries are fairly capitalistic when you actually tear the layers off of them. So, it's an interesting thing. And I spend my time mostly focused on the nuts and bolts, the infrastructure of society. And I have a lot of faith in people and trust in people. This is another difference between San Francisco and me. Gun rights are a great example of that. The whole point of saying people should have guns or be allowed to have them is saying, I trust my neighbor. That's what it really comes down to. I trust you enough that you can have something that can kill me, but I'm still okay with you having it because I think you're a rational, mature person. When you start having society fall apart, usually the ills of that stem from the fact that you lose trust in people. You look at your neighbors not as friends, but as potential competitors or enemies or people that are against you. And there's 1,000 other things you could look to where you start losing touch with people and you stop thinking of the local community. You stop thinking of people as assets or people that can work with you, help you. And you start saying, well, I can't trust anybody, so I need to build systems that are intrinsically paranoid and start taking things away from people proactively to protect each other. I will remind you, Switzerland, for example, is a very gun-friendly country in a certain respect. They trust their citizens with military-grade weapons and train them how to use them. And they have one of the lowest rates of gun violence because the society works in a particular way. It's not the only way to do things, but it's something to think about. And it's a different way of looking at these particular issues. But I often don't comment on them, except for when I see that people are starting to suffer from propaganda. As I made my video today, it's getting to a really bad point where people are incapable of listening to opposing opinions. We used to have this saying that you can disagree without being disagreeable, but now it's gotten to the point where that is impossible. If you disagree, it's not because we have different values or we're different people or we look at the world differently. It's because you're an evil person who wants to harm me. And the only option I have is to destroy you, to prevent you from harming me with your harmful opinion. That's where we're at. This technology doesn't work if society has regressed to that point. You simply do not have the cognitive tools, the social tools to be entrusted with things as powerful as your own money, your own privacy, your own identity. This is not batteries included. There are no custodians here. The point of cryptocurrencies is to push power to the edges, and with great power comes great responsibility, as Spider-Man's uncle reminded us. And that great responsibility is the responsibility to be self-sovereign, to be master of your own life, and to use these powers with great wisdom and still try to collectively build a better society, despite the fact that you can cause great harm. That's a scary thought for people who have no faith and trust in humanity. And these great centers of tolerance, such as San Francisco, they tend to forget that. And they tend to really like hypercentralization. That's why Twitter and Facebook and all of these other companies that have come out of those realms tend to look the way that they look. And they tend to regress and become these dystopian, hypercentralized, top-down entities that basically tell you what's best for you. Okay, so that's the answer to that question.